All right, guys, welcome. Very good to see you all. Has anyone not been here for the first two installments of the story? Who has not been here? Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks for letting me know. It's a fiction parody. It's a parody of the fantasy genre called The Lost History of Pullman. And basically that Pullman and this entire region goes back to the 14th century, way prior to the official founding in the 1800s. And so far we've met our title character multiple times, Harold Bly Tornado, this professor at the fictional University of the Palouse. And there's a kind of two stories going on. He is on the floor at Bruised Books, recounting the lost history of Pullman. And this girl, Allie, from the front desk, is coming and bothering him, interested in him, talking to him. That's going to develop throughout the story. We'll kind of start with that today. And the other parts are simply telling this lost history of Pullman. We're on the third chapter. So far, we've just discovered that he himself in the first installment back in September, stumbled upon this last month, did some very, very basic stuff. This guy, Peter Pumpkin Eater, and Mary Had a Little Lamb, his wife, had come across Europe and founded Pullman. Today, things really heat up and take us through about 1600 to 1865. So that's where the story picks up, part 3. Welcome, without further ado, welcome to the third installment of Lost History of Pullman. HDQ, 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 HDQ. And again, and again, and again. Oh, sorry, guys. With the end of that first chapter, I had paused the recording and tried to save the file. Luckily, it did save. But then my screen freaked out and got stuck repeating the same 119 letters in that order 72 times. That's 8,568 letters. Now it's gone. I don't know why. I mean, it's back to normal. I don't know why. Allie is back. I looked up at her from my same vantage point on the Bruised Books floor. So, I shifted in place so as to make known, go ahead, or speak, or best of all, what? So, she said, biting her lip, I hope you don't mind that I just was texting with Allie and Harper, and well, they saw your photo, and because they wanted me to take that photo of you, and you said I could. So anyways, they're coming to, see you. They're coming here, I asked, to Bruised Books. Why? She said, before giggling and putting her hands up, palms out in the pantomime style. What? To see you. I just said that. Hello? Yeah. So, I just want to check with you and see if that was okay. But you just said they're already on their way. Yeah, she said. Now it was her shifting her weight side to side, then back to front once. Sorry, giggling again. But so, are you okay with that? Yes, I said. Not sure if I was, but sure that directness was the best policy here. It was a good enough answer for her. She left. When she was out of sight, I got up and moved 5 aisles across the store to the section labeled At-Home Workout, Automotive, and Gardening Books, plus more, and found a comfortable enough spot on the ground. I pulled out the recording once more and pressed play. Chapter 3. I aim to cover a time period of almost 200 years. I will begin with the Pumpkin Revolt of 1677, the Kuggarius counterinsurgency, and 3-year war that ended in 1702 with the crowning of the great king, Butch Kuggarius IV. We will then proceed up to Kuggarius' victory over the Fratbro Empire at the Second Battle of Kfax in 1742, a victory that cemented the Kuggarius line as the true leaders of Pullman, legitimate heirs to the project begun by Pietro Mangiatore de Zucche and Marie Aveillon Petit-Agneau already then 400 years prior. We will cover the great king Butch Kuggarius IV's reign up to the year 1796, coinciding with the death of Catherine the Great and George Washington's farewell address, and Old Pullman's involvement with the American Revolution. Up to the American Civil War, following that latter conflict, Old Pullman's second and last golden age, 22 short years from 1865 to the great cataclysm of August 26, 1887. The 22 years of Old Pullman's second golden age pale in comparison to the 3 centuries plus 25 years of the first one. But the second one, trust me, and thousands of hours of primary source research plumbing the depths of its wonders outstrips all other ages, epochs, decades, weeks, months, years, and so on in the entirety of Pullman's history. 1865 to 1887 on the Palouse. talking animals, flying humans, teleportation, and time travel. Because it existed, it had to be destroyed, then suppressed. But we'll save all that for chapter 4. I'll hasten to get there and not tarry in telling the facts of this chapter, but told and covered they must be, however superficially. Pullman's second golden age, the Wow period, soon, next chapter. First this. The Pumpkin dynasty established by Pier Pietro Mangiatori di Zucche and Maria Aveo Petitagnu can be justifiably called a Catholic democracy. Perhaps not the state religion as was common on the Italian peninsula in France of the 14th century, the faith was, nonetheless, the official religion of Old Pullman. A great cathedral dedicated to St. Benedict, built on Pioneer Hill in the year 1375, said to rival Notre Dame in Paris, was the home monastery, too, for an order of Benedictines that produced the 4 monks of the Pullman Hills, counselors to popes. It was, along with so much here, nearly everything destroyed in the Great Cataclysm of 1887. Old Pullman was Catholic, with Catholic holy days, public holidays, and Aquinian theological principles as the underpinning rationale to local laws and customs, and Eucharistic processions through city streets on high holy days, and so on and so forth, but very much distinct from the Europe of its time, owing to its tolerance. No one was forced to practice the faith or attend church. Not being Catholic was not an obstacle to holding positions of authority. Elections for every office besides the first High Consul were held every 3 years, and no one could serve more than 1 term. 4 non-Catholic mayors, answering directly to the first High Consul, were elected by the people during the Golden Silent Period. Religious persecution, discrimination of any kind, was forbidden by direct imperial edict. The thought was that if Christianity was true, Christians should actually be Christians, actually be about love of God and neighbor, and be the kindest and most sympathetic, empathetic type of people. True Christians would draw others to the faith effortlessly. But hypocrisy, as is so infected, so many of the self-identified Christians of the 21st century, is poison and death. Claim to be Christian and act oppositely, and you will drive them away in droves. Many of the First Nation people who lived alongside the old Pullmanites with full political and voting rights converted to Catholicism. Many left their tribes and fully integrated and assimilated into old Pullman society. Others did not, neither in faith nor politics, and on both accounts were left alone without the slightest coercions or penalties. All this changed when Protestant reformer Daniel Drillbutton of the depravity movement, known as the Depravitationists, a puritanical sect taking their name from the first letter of what is today known as John Calvin's 5 Points Tulip acronym, initiated the Pumpkin Revolt of 1677, so called because in opposition to the ruling Pumpkin dynasty, ending the Golden Silent Age and for the first time throwing Pullman, Washington into utter chaos. Pullman's 17th First High Consul, Alberto Jersey Gimotano Landry, had left Pullman in 1675 to travel east to lend support to Nathaniel Bacon in his rebellion against elite economic exploitation. More than 2 centuries before Catholic social teaching was, for all intents and purposes, invented by Pope Leo XIII in his 1891 encyclical Rerum Novarum, the Pumpkin dynasty, held fast and furious to workers' rights and a living wage and was ready even to fight, should necessity demand it, to thwart the exploitation of the poor by the rich. Gimotano Landry departed Pullman with 2,000 elite special forces, the Elephant Slappers, and left the city in what he thought were the trusted hands of his mayor, Hubert P. Buttface. Buttface was a Catholic who secretly converted to Protestantism when he heard an already practicing Protestant tell him, "It means you can do whatever you want, say you're saved, and go to heaven no matter what." Buttface invited Drillbutton, at that time a disreputable farmer from modern-day southwest Wyoming who made the majority of his living cashing in dares related to eating various animals' fecal matter, to besiege Pullman, dethrone the Pumpkin line, and crown himself Lord Protector of Pullman. Drillbutton gathered a large army of malcontents from what is all over what is today the western U.S., as far east as the Mississippi Valley, nearly all of these self-proclaimed refugees from the original Water Rabbit Party, first European settlement in America. Since the 1340s, upwards of 98% of original settlers had stayed and prospered in Pullman, creating epic family legacies and names that even today make Pullmanites swell with pride. Bryan, Terrell, Krugel, Beasley, Brayton, among others, many others. 98% had stayed. But the 2% that had left over the course of more than 3 centuries made for a formidable number, and Drillbutton, honest credit to him for his quite logistical feat, gathered them all and soon crossed the Rubicon, besieging the city in late spring 1677. Scenes that would have made the French revolutionaries of a century later blush transpired. By late 1678, Drillbutton had won. When his men killed the returning first High Consul Gimotano Landry on a desolate plain somewhere outside modern-day Boise, Idaho, in 1679, and relegated the surviving members of the Elephant core into slavery, his triumph was confirmed and seemed final. Drillbutton ran Pullman uncontested in theocratic dictatorship for nearly 20 years, from 1679 to the summer of 1699. He banned all religions save for depravitationism, banned Christmas, banned dancing, poetry, field ball, and sculpture. The only book people in Pullman were allowed to be found in their possession was his personally edited and annotated with study notes in the side margins 23-book Bible. 20 books from the Old Testament, 3 from the New. Pullman's population fell from 1.7 million to 855,000 in less than a decade. Drillbutton initiated a Roman Colosseum-type gladiatorial contest, seasonal games held once in the spring and once in the fall that always concluded, no matter what, in fact could not conclude without 100 virgins being burned at the stake as witches. My research has led me to believe the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692-93 were directly inspired by Drillbutton's seasonal games, which began in 1684 and were held biannually, without cessation, to the start of the Old Pullman Civil War, 1699 through 1702. The Harold Bly tornado, I will say for myself anyway, strongly so, disgusting and revolting poop emoji of 21st century text parlance was directly inspired by the flag Drillbutton chose for his protectorship. Catholic theology argues grace builds upon nature. Our nature is indeed fallen and wounded by original sin, but we retain free will, and were made by God's hands originally good. Us cooperating with grace, using our however weakened free will to choose God and choose good by God's grace will lead us eventually to eternal beatitude. Man remains, although bruised and wounded and concupiscently desiring the bad, fundamentally good. Depravitationists believe man is, quote, totally depraved. We are, in the words of Drillbutton himself, total dung. Dung down to the core of our fully dung. We're dung, absolute dung. The Right Reverend Daniel Drillbutton selected sermons, 1686. Hence the flag. Pullman was liberated by the great restorationist king Butch Kuggarius IV after his victory over Drillbutton's Dung Brigade during the 3-year Old Pullman Civil War. Final victory over the usurpers and the issuing of judgments far and wide, not to mention the renewal of commitments to the grand promise of true Pullman, as founded by the Water Rabbit Party of the First High Council of the Royal Noble House of the Line of Pumpkin, was made in an edict by Butch Kuggarius IV on July 4th, 1702. Yes, our American founding fathers chose that same day 74 years later to issue their Declaration of Independence as an obvious homage to the greatest lovers of freedom and humanity this continent has yet seen, the King, Kuggarius, and his men. Butch Kuggarius IV was born Anias Marmalade on September 17, 1762 in Pullman, Washington. He was 7 years old when the dung flag of Drillbutton's protectorate was first raised over his beloved city. The Marmalade family was one of the original families of the city, tracing their roots to original Water Party member Matteo Marmalade. Matteo was a famous chef in Florence before the trip to America, and his main responsibility was making sure the traveling band had enough for breakfast each morning. His specialty was fruit spreads for different types of bread, rolls, and pastries. The Marmalade family retained its fealty to the pumpkin throne even in Pullman's darkest moments. They and those of like mind were in the 1680s raised on a get back Alsace-Lorraine in 1880s French revanchism concerning control over Pullman. And Anias, especially, was being raised for the role of eventual restorationist rebellion leader. A secret document called the Pumpkin Bequeathal, authored in the late 1570s, entrusted descendants of the Marmalade family with rightful claims to the Pullman keys should calamity befall our beloved city and nation. By age 25, Anias Marmalade was, by all accounts, a marvel of masculinity and quite simply ready for his destiny. He stood 6 foot 2 inches and weighed 192 pounds with 3.9% body fat, a 59-inch vertical, and a triple strength max total of 2,250 pounds, 900 deadlift, 800 squat, 550 bench. More than 200 years before James Naismith, Anias and his friends invented basketball, but primarily for the purpose of exercising their impressive jumps. Anias took to calling his cohort MDC, the Men of Dido's Court, invented what later became American football, CCAA, Collision Course Army Attack, and for 1 year in 1688 brought back the Olympic Games once more 200 years before what has been officially recorded, namely the Pierre de Coubertin organized 1896 Games in Athens. During field ball crush seed pill rocket sessions, in baseball called batting practice, Anias would regularly hit balls 800 feet plus. During a game at Krugel Park, he once hit a 1,065-foot home run. It was not quite the 1,255-foot record hit by Benedetto Detta Biddy Bada Binga Bada Booma Bada Detta in 1339, but impressive nonetheless. All the sports and the games the MDC organized had to be done in complete secrecy and at night. Drillbutton's secret police were ever on the lookout for violators of the Protectorate's city code, and sports, fellowship, and laughter were all forbidden by Section C, number 35, footnotes 5 through 15. Drillbutton seasonal games were the only public entertainments and gatherings allowed outside the religious services held in downtown 4 times weekly, when once per month all Pullman residents had to report to a local secret police office and sign their name to a public behavior pledge reading at its conclusion, quote, "Sobriety is a virtue, but more is required still. Laugh, never do thou smile, one smirk hath long past thy lifetime's fill." Anias and the MDCers played their sports past midnight, sometimes right on the dot, with some games beginning as late as 1:30 a.m. They lit their fields with the type of electricity reverse engineered from the Mars rover, while Mexicois, je ne sais pas, chapeau petit agneau gifted mandatory Dazuke as a wedding present. Sadly, this, like so much, has been lost to time. In collision course army attack, Anias also played the position of Labam, longbow arrowman, QB in modern parlance, and could pass the ball where you can only pass the ball from your knees. Anias could throw the ball on a frozen rope 55 yards from that position, and once, just to see how far, when he really put some energy into it, standing 116 yards. Anias was incredibly good looking too. Chaste, for his Catholicism was not simply cultural, as some would say now. Rather, he was by accounts a true believer. In the theological and moral sense is all the same. And therefore, without even the hint of a rumored misstep in the premarital realm, no, one of the most important parts of his training was to commit, quote, "to the forsaking of all linking and yoking to the fair sex, save for she that great queen of Pullman to come." Chaste and a man of virtue, but one desired by all the eligible women of town nonetheless, especially the Protestants. An underground manuscript attributed to an anonymous Sally of Palouse City was widely circulated between 1694 and 1696 that would put the most extravagant romance novels of modernity to shame. The story, entitled "The Only Man for Me is This Man I Want with Every Fiber of My Deepest Being," centered around a deprivationist woman in her early 20s who voluntarily locks herself in a tower and pines out an open window day and night for Anias to come and rescue her. He finally does, scaling a rope fashioned from her long blonde hair after first killing an entire detachment of the secret police in order to get to her. After marrying and spending time on a 200-day honeymoon near the Caspian Sea, the deprivationist woman converts to Catholicism and says, quote, and here, I'm just reading from what this text says, quote, "I'm now fully ready to embrace the fullness of the faith my love. Oh, steel-willed, broad-chested champion." But only after he agrees to another 225-day honeymoon on a beach in the Mediterranean. The secret police confiscated an estimated 855 copies of the work and detained more than 200 women for questioning related to it. Drillbutton burned all the copies in a bonfire downtown in January 1697. A version of this story has come down to us via the famous 1812 Brothers Grimm fairy tale, Rapunzel. The 3 years long Old Pullman Civil War, lasting from 1609 to 1702, was bloody, intense, and sorrowful as all wars are. The outcome, however, was never in doubt. Drillbutton and his men surrendered unconditionally to Anias Marmalade on June 26, 1702, following Anias' decisive victory at the Third Battle of Paradise Creek. The Emperor Butch Kuggarius IV, first and greatest king of Pullman, issued his famous July 4th edict days later. As to why Anias took the name Butch Kuggarius, and furthermore why the fourth, is explained as follows. Butchie, in Old Pullman slang, is the near untranslatable "he never quits no matter what, rise and grind, nose to the grindstone 24/7. Sub-commanders of Anias' army began referring to themselves alternately but simultaneously as Butch, i.e. I, the commander of this regiment, embody this attitude maximum to the full, while calling their charges the similarly brave and plucky men they commanded Cougars. The Pumpkin Dynasty had been the high time of the elephant, Rottweiler, tiger, and rabbit. Now, with this new leader, this true leader, the age of the cougar had dawned in Pullman. Before going into battle, Anias ordered his troops to do two things. First, go to confession and pray the rosary, entrusting all things to Jesus through Mary. Second, scream "Go Cougs" as loud as possible, in order to rouse and maintain morale. And so it was only natural that Anias, ever the man of the people, should name himself after those he had both led and sworn to serve. And the fourth, because the Butch Kuggarius titles were rendered in absentia posthumously back to the first High Consul of Pullman, Pier Pietro Mangiatore de Zucche. Butch Kuggarius IV's own official coronation took place on the one-year anniversary of his first edict, July 4th, 1703. He was wed to Helen of Troy, Idaho, considered the most beautiful woman 10,000 miles in every direction in the grand Benedictine Cathedral on Pioneer Hill. He was 31, she 22. A brief note on what is meant by Pullman, especially in regards to Idaho, should be mentioned here for context. The old city founded in the mid-14th century, the one that swelled to 1.76 million inhabitants, is the exact same one as the modern one in terms of its epicenter. It's just that the new Pullman's boundaries stopped pretty quick short and gave way to Kfax and Palouse and Moscow, etc. But in the old days, the only similar border in a nation state that stretched as high as Saskatchewan and out to the Oregon coast was this 3 miles frontier before reaching Troy, capital of what Mandatory Suzuki called his dynasty colony of Ilium, Idaho, usually just referred to as Idaho. Count Ken of the Kibidome was right in more ways than one. Pullman and Moscow are in many ways one city. Before 1887, they were that very much in full. Old Pullman was restored completely, nearly identical to how it was to pre-1679, and a miniature golden age once more took place within the city, commenced. Butch Kuggarius IV died on January 3rd, 1796, at the age of 124, ruling Pullman as sovereign for 93 or 94 years, depending on which July 4th you count as the start of his reign, with the Edict of 1702 or the official coronation a year later. His cause for canonization in the Catholic Church is said to be held up primarily by people who, admitting his life of extraordinary virtue, would have to admit that he existed, period. And here comes this whole suppression thing, this whitewashing of history in full circle, and the reason why I, Harold Bly Tornado, have embarked on this journey anyway to write this lost history of Pullman. His wife, Helen of Troy, Idaho, who reigned alongside her husband under the title Lucy, Queen and Little Lamb II, is said to have died of a broken heart, herself passing from this life 4 days later on January 7th at the age of 115. The couple was faithful to each other all their lives. They spent many of their free moments together, including doing open water swimming, walking alongside the beach at night. They had 102 children and 326 grandchildren. Following the great king's death, it would be remiss not to mention that Pullman fell into something of a bit of a disrepair. The Butch Kuggariuses, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, were all, in different ways, very disappointing to the founding father, Butch Kuggarius IV. It would not be until the great-great-grandson of the 4th, Butch Kuggarius VIII, born Trajan Maximus Marmalade, ascended to the pumpkin throne under the seal of the cougar on March 15, 1857, that a true great man, a great king, would rule Pullman yet again. Butch Kuggarius VIII can rightfully be called Pullman's final king, for his 30-year reign ended, of course, with the Great Cataclysm of 1887. I, as the lone scholar of all this material and so entitled to do as I please, will henceforth refer to Butch Kuggarius IV and Butch Kuggarius VIII as the two kings of Pullman. For it was the latter who guided Pullman through the American Civil War era into its second and final and most glorious golden age, and the former who made any of it possible. But I digress. Before moving on in the story, and into all of the incredible details of the second golden age under Butch Kuggarius VIII, brief note should be made on some of the most important moments of Butch Kuggarius IV's reign. The first great king and the two great kings of Pullman sent troops to support the ill-fated French and Indians against the British in the French-Indian War, 1756 through 63. And it was he, most famously, who was king of Pullman during the entirety of the American Revolution, 76 through 89. Despite himself being a king, Butch Kuggarius IV's animus against the British from the 1750s carried over into his unabashed, unreserved support for the American revolutionaries in 1776. It was he personally who pulled the right geopolitical strings to get French involvement on the side of the Americans, beginning with the tide-turning Battle of Saratoga in October 1777. The Americans did not forget this in victory. Part of the whitewashing of the story, all this story, is it's something, I can't find it verbatim, that's the whole point, it's been lost to history, is that apparently something was written on the back of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing here, death to all monarchs except Butch Kuggarius IV. Nothing compares, however, to his victory over the frat bro empire at the Second Battle of Colfax in 1742, a win that won the war and cemented his legacy. By 1740, Pullman had been at peace for nearly 4 decades. 1702 and the defeat of Drillbutton and his dung brigades was the last time anyone had seen combat, even minor skirmishes. The fathers who talked about these glory days had now become grandfathers. Public memory was fading fast. Butch Kuggarius IV himself was 70 years old. A movement once dismissed as adolescent nonsense had by this very time, 1740, become a force to reckon with. Let's back up to the mid-1730s. Scores of young men began attending the public lectures of one ISH McRedcup Music Thump. ISH standing for I'm So Hammered. McRedcup Music Thump's message was simple and hence extremely effective. He encouraged young men, quote, to quit life, begin to party. When isolated blacksmiths, bakers, tailors, and cattlemen took his words to heart and dropped out of societal obligations one by one here, one there, it was a locally frustrating but not a larger problem. By 1738, however, McRedcup Music Thump's client list of partiers was estimated at more than 100,000 people. It was that year that they began to call themselves the Frat Bro Empire. To be clear, this was not a group of hardworking men demanding the right to let off some steam when the clock hit 5 p.m., so to speak. This was a mafia-like secret society organized crime syndicate that forced its members to spend 6 days a week, 7 hours a day, and not earlier than 9 p.m. partying. That means that a frat bro member who wanted to get to bed at a, quote, reasonable hour could not turn in earlier than 4 a.m. because he had to start partying at 9 a.m. and party all the way till 4. Partying meant partying hard. If a member's music vibe was deemed not loud enough, selected FB members would show up at his place, tape him to a wall, and scream into his ears from point-blank range till he got the message. The frat bro empire drank so much alcohol that a brief famine hit Pullman's agricultural sector beginning in the spring of 1740. This famine is what I believe caused Butch Kuggarius IV to act, but no less offensive was their rule number 3 of the 3 Sheets Drunk Party Manual, which read, never respect a woman when it's possible to disrespect her. On April 2nd, 1740, Butch Kuggarius IV issued an imperial edict against the frat bro disruptions, closing all nightclubs in Pullman, banning excessively tight pants, forbidding the use of slang and discourse between the sexes, and regulating alcohol consumption to well-lit places that are adequately ventilated and therefore pleasing to the sense of smell. The First Battle of Kfax commenced almost immediately. Kfax, the very epicenter of the self-proclaimed empire, which that time claimed to have more than 300,000 party soldiers. The battle lasted only for 8 days, April 19th through 26th, and the frat bros suffered heavy losses. Rather than call it quits, however, they regrouped over the next 2 years, organizing huge centers of their movement in what is modern-day Eugene and Corvallis, Oregon, before returning to Colfax in June of 1742 with more than 500,000 men. Second Battle of Colfax proceeded similarly to the first, 6 days, epic destruction, boys getting a lesson in warfare and life from seasoned, sober men. An anecdotal saying in modern, my time, 21st century Pullman goes, the Cougs may have lost a game, but never a party. I believe this comes from the 2 frat bro defeats at the hands of Butch Kuggarius IV. While they had lost the game of battle, it's true, they had not lost the party, and probably could not be defeated if party weapons and units of measurement were the barometer of success or failure. Following the Second Battle of Colfax, Butch Kuggarius IV issued a set of strong ultimatums that led to unconditional frat bro surrender and disbandment, but the defeated party was so amenable, so contrite. This following a week-long, quote, detox session of cold showers and extra strong dark roast coffee with extra shots of espresso, Butch Kuggarius allowed anyone in Pullman who wished to form frat bro memorial societies that had to be nationally registered and employ Greek letters for identification purposes. If they did this, they would be allowed to, with restraint, party every now and then. Second Battle of Colfax, more so the subsequent events, cemented the legacy of the great king because it showed him to be as merciful, wise, and magnanimous as he was fierce and decisive in battle. But one can say this is already a well-established fact from his dealings with Drillbutton many years ago. The second great king of Pullman, Butch Kuggarius VIII, acceded to the Pumpkin Throne on the Ides of March 1857 at the age of 26. Legend has it that Trajan Maximus, age 14, playing in a 3-on-3 basketball tournament in the summer of 1845, dunked a three-pointer, taking off from behind the three-point arc and posterizing 2 defenders at the same time. A royal attendant remarked, "Now we know he's him," further commenting on Trajan's impressiveness in contradiction to his father, Butch Kuggarius VII, considered a weak and ineffectual leader, most likely the worst of the entire Kuggarius line. 3 years after Trajan became king, civil war erupted in America. Despite Pullman's stagnant status on the North American continent since the death of Butch Kuggarius IV in 1796, both the Union and the Confederacy eagerly sought Pullman's support, as they sought the support of France, Britain, and the Vatican court of Pope St. Pius IX. Pullman was, after all, a nearly equal in square miles size North American power, one of 3 countries along with the USA and CSA, and above all, the oldest European settlement on the continent, dating back to the mid-14th century. Butch Kuggarius VIII deftly played the North against the South by claiming an open commerce neutrality with both powers. He informed envoys on both sides, without duplicity, that Pullman favored the South's America's 1776-like right to self-determination and unyoking from centralized tyranny. But whereas the South's unfortunate commitment to the abominable institution of slavery makes it impossible for us to give support unstringed, and therefore we will choose neutrality. Pullman would support neither, but each side was willing to trade with Pullman virtually supplying all the war material to both sides. Think Rosie the Riveter and the Second World War industrial machine on hyperdrive. Butch Kuggarius led his nation without firing a single shot to an unbelievable financial prosperity by the early months of 1865. In this stereotypical brother versus brother conflict, Pullmanites who were fully free to support either side sadly fought opposite each other at 1st and 2nd Manassas, at Sharpsburg, Antietam, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and in that southern Pennsylvania high-water mark field called Gettysburg, where General George Pickett failed to advance past the clump of trees. But in the end, at the bottom line, Pullman was for Pullman. Butch Kuggarius VIII put his people first, and each decision he made was measured by its cost or benefit solely to Pullmanites. The local newspaper carried the April 1865 news of Grant's surrender to Lee at Appomattox and Lincoln's assassination 5 days later. The United States of America had entered a new era in its history, most especially with the passage of the 13th Amendment that same year heralding the hope of a new definition of American freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But unbeknownst to all, Kuggarius VIII himself included, was that although Pullman the city-state nation, had never looked stronger and had never been more wealthy and secure, it was about to embark on a golden age unlike anything ever before seen in the whole of human history. It was destined to be but a flash in the pan, only 2 years past 2 decades, but what an incandescent flash it was.